this is the introduction to postmodernism, and I'm going to show you this video instead of actually holding it in front of you, since I am in Malaysia this week. During this theme, we are going to do the following. You will learn what defines postmodernism and also be able to see the definitions of postmodernism in movies and novels, or a novel. You're going to read the novel Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer, and you will get this book today and start reading it today. You will watch and discuss Pulp Fiction, and we are going to analyze Pulp Fiction from or see the postmodern aspects of Pulp Fiction. You are going to write a literary analysis of the novel Everything is Illuminated, and this is in a couple of weeks. So, before we start on postmodernism, we actually have to start with modernism, since that is what comes before postmodernism. Post, of course, means after, so this is postmodernism is after modernism. Today we might talk about modernism as something that is slightly old-fashioned, but this was in the beginning of the 20th century. However, modernism may be seen as an attempt to reconstruct the world in the absence of God, and this is a quote from a person called Brian Appleyard. And this summarizes basically everything about modernism, because modernism started, it's something that you can see in art and in literature, basically. It started in the early 20th century, and especially after the First World War. Modernism is characterized by a doubt and mistrust of authorities, because what happened in the early 20th century was that we had especially we had the Russian Revolution, we had people overthrowing a government, and then a dictatorship coming there, and we have a very early democracies in the Western Europe, and authorities, people were doubting the authorities. Well, can you trust them or can't you trust them, and so on and so forth. Colonies were starting to break up, especially in the middle of the 20th century, and so this is something that you can see quite often if you read modern or modernistic literature and watch art of that sort. Modernists, they wanted to break with old traditions, and the old traditions in this case is basically realism, because during the 19th century realism was what was the thing. Victorian literature, for instance, we have Dickens and the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen, and all of them wrote realistic literature when everything was supposed to feel like it really happened. And in modernism, that was not the main goal. So modernism, especially in literature and also in art, it's experimental and norm-breaking and trying new things, things that are not entirely realistic. And as I said, modernism is basically grounded in the First World War, which of course was a major trauma in Europe. And the First World War also meant that new social structures became reality. Basically, we have the working class and the nobility and the upper middle classes, and everyone, especially if you were a soldier, everyone met in the trenches. So it didn't really matter what social class you were from, you were all in the ditch together, basically. So this is something you can see in modernism, that you started losing respect, basically, for the different social classes. I'm not saying that they disappeared, because they didn't, but there were new social structures, and you didn't really have to follow the old norms as strictly or harshly as you did before. So this is an example of modernism. For instance, modernists asked themselves, what is truth? We have to remember that in the early 20th century, photography was quite new, and not entirely new, but it was quite new. So there you could see reality, basically. So this is a picture from, I think it's from the Western Front, and here in photography you could see what the world really looked like, but modernists said, well, yes, this is how it looks, but is that what it really is? And is this what you could really feel? And their answer was, well, no. This is more in the taste of modernists. And this is Guernica by Picasso, and it's a part of Cubism. And this Guernica depicts the bombing of the city Guernica in the Spanish Civil War, which was in 1937. And Picasso was a modernist. So modernists, they wanted to show you what it felt like being somewhere. And this picture is supposed to give you a feeling of how it could have been to be in one of the buildings when Guernica was bombed, which would give you a sense of the feeling much more than just a picture, photography of one of the, of bombing. When we look at modernists and modernist literature and or art, this is a checklist, and I'm giving you this because we can relate this to postmodernism further on. In modernist, especially writing, there are often multiple points of view. So you do not only have one main character, you have several, and you see the same story from different perspectives. That's very modern or modernistic. Quite often you have no chronology or fragmentation. So the story doesn't start from the beginning, but it may start in the middle, and then you go back to the beginning, and then you go to the end, and then you go back to the middle. So there is no clear chronology in some of the modernist stories. I'm not saying that all of this needs to be involved to be called a modernist, but these are things that are quite often there. Sometimes in modernist literature you have gaps and you have things written between the lines. You're not told everything. You have to sense certain things. Major scenes might even be cut out of the text, for instance, or film for that matter. And you as a viewer or reader, you have to guess it, and you can sort of see it from what's implied between the lines. Sometimes there is a certain uncertainty about language. What is a word? What is God? What is truth? Can we interpret words in different ways? Can you make up words? Sometimes you have that in modernist literature. Something that you can see in some modernist writers is that they use stream of consciousness, and you can see this in, for instance, Virginia Woolf. She writes in Mrs. Dalloway and other stories. You have people thinking. You read basically what they think, and you're going to read an extract from a text next week where you can see this. So the text basically does not really have any full stops. You have everything just flowing, one thing after the other. You can have full stops, by the way, but everything streams like you would think things. So you can go from one thing to another thing to back to the beginning. And sometimes it's rather difficult to read, but if you think of it as being thoughts, it's a lot easier. Modernists, they wanted to be taken seriously, and often when you read modernists, you see that there is a certain seriousness to it. It's very serious. You have Virginia Woolf, you have, for instance, and you have other modernist writers, and it's all about life and death and what's coming after, and however, what about life, and so on and so forth. So it's often very serious. And now we're moving over to postmodernism, because what we have now is not seriousness at all. Now we play around. This is also a quote by Nietzsche, and he said, "There is no truth, there are only opinions." Having followed what happens right now in what they call as a post-truth society, Nietzsche's words are quite, you can see that they're applicable to today, which is perhaps a bit annoying sometimes. However, postmodernists, they said that, well, you can't be certain of anything, not even words, so you can only have opinions about them, and that's what's fun about it. And some say that postmodernism is basically modernism on steroids, and they want to have fun. The world, according to postmodernists, is meaningless, and art and literature cannot make sense of it. So that's why you should just enjoy it as much as you can. And this is a postmodernist checklist. Very often postmodernists, they break the rules of genre. You could say that you might think something is a comedy, but then it's not. And an example is, for instance, maybe you think this is the story about Little Red Riding Hood with the, well, big bad wolf. Not really called that, but still. But then again, no, this is the story where Little Red Riding Hood is kicking a wolf in the stomach. So that's a certain postmodern take on that story. And there is quite often an intertextuality, which means that postmodernists may borrow characters or plots or scenes or references from other works of literature or films or art or whatever. And especially in The Simpsons, they use this quite a lot. They use intertextuality very often, and this is just a case where they have used well, the sort of characteristics from the film A Clockwork Orange, and put Bart Simpson in the role of the main character there, who I forget his name. Never mind. And this is what it's called pastiche, and intertextual pastiche is part of intertextuality. And quite often you have a decentering of texts, and this means that you do not focus on the main character. Often these are mixed, so you're going to read, next week you're going to read an extract from a play which is called Guildenstern and Rosencrantz Are Dead, and they take two very minor characters from Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and the whole play is centered around these two characters. So there you both have intertextuality, actually borrowing the story of Hamlet, and a decentering of text. You focus on two very minor characters from the original. In postmodernism, they very often play around with words. It's not just that you can interpret words in different ways, but they go like, what are words anyway? These are just letters put together to form things that we have, for one reason or another, agreed upon mean something. And if you want to see a rather funny interpretation of this, basically you can go to YouTube and write Eddie Izzard on Latin, and there you'll see Eddie Izzard making fun of Latin, and he's just playing around with words, so he's an example of that. Last but not least, in a postmodernist checklist, you have metafiction, and metafiction means that the author, or as this might be the case, a producer of a film, point out to you that you are in fact reading a text, or you are in fact watching a movie, and so that you're sort of taken out of your because when you read or watch a film, you're supposed to feel like you're part of the film or part of the book, and you should believe it. But metafiction means that you're taken out of that that belief, and being shown that you're actually watching something. And we can see this in Pulp Fiction, for instance, when we watch that film further on. And you can also see it in Everything is Illuminated. It's pointed out to you that you are in fact reading a text that someone else has written. So look out for these postmodern features or characteristics. So, Everything is Illuminated. Everything is Illuminated is written by Jonathan Safran Foer, and some of you might have heard about him before, maybe read some of his other novels. And yes, this book is also a film. However, do not think you can watch the film and then sit and participate in a book discussion, because you cannot. The movie is very dissimilar from the book. You may watch it, but beware, it's not the same as reading the book. You'll miss quite a lot. And I'm going to give you a short plot overview just to get you on the track, because this book might be a little bit difficult to get into otherwise. This is the basic plot outline. You have the hero, Jonathan Safran Foer. Beware, this is not the real author Jonathan Safran Foer, but the character Jonathan Safran Foer, who also is an author. Anyway, the hero here goes to Ukraine in search of a person called Augustin, who apparently helped the character Jonathan Safran Foer's grandfather escape from the Nazis during the Second World War. So Jonathan Safran Foer goes to Ukraine to search for Augustin, and to help him find Augustin, he has enlisted a company called Heritage Tours, or Heritage Touring, I forget which. This company is run by a man who has set a guide and a translator for Jonathan. And this man is called Alex. His father is called Alex, and his son is also called Alex, just to make things easier. However, the Alex here, who will help Jonathan Safran Foer translate from Ukrainian to English and the other way around, is the son Alex, who is basically the same age as Jonathan. And this interpreter, Alex, goes on this trip rather hesitantly, and the guide is Alex's grandfather, also called Alex, who is, in his own words, blind, and he's also the driver. Well, you can see there are some slight difficulties here. However, the three of them, plus a dog, and you'll find out more about the dog eventually, they go on this trip. The trip is actually only a few days, but it's part of the whole story. So that's one part of the story. There are three storylines. One of the storylines is the whole journey, and that's Alex's story, Alex the translator's story. He writes about their journey, their trip, and that story is told in the present tense. So we have that as one of the parts. Another part, another storyline, is Alex's letters to Jonathan. Alex, this translator, writes letters to Jonathan after the journey is over, so when Jonathan has gone back to America. So these letters are interspersed with the other two storylines, as you will see. You will also notice that Alex, who is a Ukrainian young man, his English is not the best, especially not in the beginning. But pay close attention to Alex's English, and you'll see something. The last storyline of the story is the one that is actually written by the character Jonathan Safran Foer, and that is the fictional, we understand, fictional family history of Jonathan, the character Jonathan, that is. And that's also, as I said, written by the character Jonathan Safran Foer. The whole story, of course, is written by the real person, Jonathan Safran Foer. And as you can see, it might be a little bit difficult to sort out who is who here. But once you start reading, you'll find it out. And you'll see that Alex, especially, he is commenting on what Jonathan writes, and he also asks for Jonathan's comments back on what he has written. We never see what Jonathan writes to Alex, and that's part of postmodernism, which in this case also takes its characteristic from modernist writing, because here we have gaps and fragmentation. So this is the basic storyline of the book. When you read this book, and you're going to start very shortly, keep a sheet of paper inside and take down quotes and scenes and keywords and new or difficult vocabulary. Put down page numbers on pages you want to go back to, etc., etc. This will help you when you discuss and write about the book and when you analyze it. So be efficient, be smart when you read, and put this down, because then of course you do not have to go back to the book once you're to write about it and find the examples again, because then you've already written down where you can find them. When you read it, look out for the postmodern aspects of the novel. So if you find fragmentation, if you find intertextuality, if you find metafiction and so on and so forth, and you can find metafiction, it is pointed out to you basically that you are reading a story. And if you want to look deeper into the book, and this is something I recommend you doing once you've read a bit. Then go to the document that I will or have posted, I'm not sure right now, I'm going to post it anyway, on FC. There you can find a document called Questions and Quotes for Everything is Illuminated. Be warned though, because I have put all the questions and quotes for the whole book in that document, so there are spoilers there. So I recommend you not looking too early at this, because then you might well, have some parts of the story revealed to you that you might not want revealed at this point in time. So now we've gone through what postmodernism is, and also what modernism is, and you have had the basic storyline of Everything is Illuminated. Now I want you to take one of the books each, borrow it from the library, and then start reading it. And I hope you enjoy the book. Next week, week 3, you're gonna write a reading journal for me, so please read the first about 100 pages till next week.